Hello, my dear ones. Tonight we have another evening of psychology by the fireplace, and I'm reading the next question I selected for our conversation today. The question is, please tell me, is it good to be a modest person? I am very shy and I'm embarrassed by everything all the time. Since childhood, I was always told that I had to be very well bred, and I'm simply afraid to build any social connections at all, afraid to communicate. As a result, I live alone with my mother and feel embarrassed all the time, at home and at work. As usual, it is all a bit tangled. Let's sort it out. Two very important categories are raised here, modesty and shame. And sometimes people confuse them and think they are the same thing. You know, these are completely different things. If we are speaking about a person who is constantly ashamed, constantly feeling shame, what do we see? A beaten down person who is afraid to be themselves, afraid to appear in society, afraid to start a conversation, afraid to make new connections. And this is not just something negative, it is something deeply painful. It awakens compassion and the desire to help and the understanding that such a person really needs support. But when people say, whether in literature or in life, he is such a pleasant, modest person, then yes, modest. We do not feel that this person must be rescued. It feels like something pleasant. We even get the impression that it will be comfortable to communicate with such a person, to get acquainted with them, to build social or professional ties with them, because if they are modest, then they will likely be comfortable to be around. So, what is the essence here? Why, in the question I read for today's conversation, are modesty and shame mixed together and almost treated as the same thing? Why does this happen? What is modesty? Very often, when this confusion is forming, a child may hear certain things from parents who most likely mean well, wanting the child to fit well into society later, to go to kindergarten and not misbehave, to be a good boy or a good girl, then to go to school and study well. So, of course, the child should not be rude, not arrogant, but modest, and then everything, supposedly, will be fine. On the surface, that sounds correct. At first glance, yes. But how is modesty actually formed? How is it explained why one should be modest? And right at this stage, patterns begin. Aren't you ashamed? How could you not be ashamed? How could you do that? You are disgracing us. We are ashamed of you. Ashamed, ashamed, ashamed. But what is shame? Shame is, first of all, an emotion of fear, the fear of not being accepted, the fear that you won't be loved, the fear of not being understood, the fear of being rejected. Shame is the fear of being rejected, and that is terrifying. So when a child hears, aren't you ashamed? Aren't you ashamed? We will reject you now. We, your parents, the people closest to you, feel disgusted by you right now. That is rejection. And then shame gets mixed together with modesty. You must be modest. You must not act out. Aren't you ashamed? In other words, if you do something wrong, we take away our unconditional love. But unconditional love cannot be taken away. A child loves you unconditionally up to about the age of 5. And when, in response to that unconditional love, the child meets this kind of bargaining, aren't you ashamed? If you do not behave the accepted way, we will reject you, society will reject you. You are disgracing us. Society will reject us because you disgrace us. Then the little human being feels not only that they are the cause of their own misery, but also that they are the cause of their parents' unhappiness. Those parents whom they love unconditionally and whom they are somehow ruining life for. And in the little mind of this tiny being, so full of love for their parents and so deeply in need of unconditional love in return, everything collapses. And what remains is this shame, and then the constant fear of being rejected. And that is why the girl who wrote this letter The adult woman who still lives with her mother cannot really find a boyfriend or even close friends. She is afraid to speak. She is constantly ashamed that she will do something wrong and be rejected. Very often, when a child is shamed with, "Aren't you ashamed?" they don't even really understand what exactly they did wrong, because the parents themselves often cannot explain it. That is another very important topic, and I get many questions about it. I will definitely make a video about that as well. Because when you ask something of a child, you really need to explain why. Parents often do not know how to explain it. They simply know that they want to bring the child into the state of being a convenient person, because then life in society will supposedly be easier. But what exactly was wrong is often never explained. You know, when I was in school, there were still those assemblies where a child could be brought out in front of the whole school. A little first dash, second dash, or third grader could be made to stand before everyone because, for example, they had been running at recess, knocked something over in a special corner with exhibits, and broke it. And then they would be put in front of the whole assembly before all the students, high schoolers, teachers, and their own classmates. And they had to stand there so they would feel ashamed. Teachers would openly say, "You should be ashamed. Everyone is looking at you, and you are bad. You ran around and broke something." But that child simply had the impulse to run. There are children who truly need to run out of the classroom during recess and move to release the stress of having sat still. And maybe he broke something completely by accident. He did not even understand what exactly was wrong. He just had a need to run, and all the other children were running too. He just happened to be the one who broke something. I am telling you this as one example from the kind of memories adults may later carry. Successful adult men, even bosses, who still live with deep inner complexes. One such assembly may become a terrible nightmare that awakens this neurotic shame. And how many such boys and girls are there? More boys, because girls are usually more obedient. Boys were more often brought out in front of assemblies, shamed at school, shamed in the family, all with the best intentions. No one is really to blame. If a person was themselves raised this way, then later they will raise their own children or their students in the same way until somehow this closed chain is broken, and this kind of neurotic shame, the constant shame of being rejected, prevents a person from being happy, even a rather successful person. And in the case of the author of this letter, the girl was simply very lonely. Her personality also mattered. One child might be put on display in an assembly and then later laugh it off and think, "Oh, whatever." But another child may have a very vulnerable, delicate temperament, and then the child simply begins to fear everything. She was exactly such a sensitive girl, emotionally fragile and tender, and this constant shame, the fear of being rejected, brought her to the point that, before therapy, she was completely shut down. She could not make friends at all. She just went to work, then came home to her mother. And at work, she didn't connect with anyone either, just hiding at her desk. That was her life. And yet, look at this. This pathological, neurotic shame is imposed on a little person from what are supposedly the best intentions to raise in them this beautiful quality of inner culture and noble modesty. Because noble modesty truly is a very beautiful quality. A modest person never imposes themselves on anyone. They do not put themselves on display. They respect another person's inner space and outer space, their own boundaries and the other person's boundaries. They respect themselves too. A modest person has no need for praise, no need to display themselves, no need to advertise themselves, because they have inner modesty, the ability to understand what is appropriate and what is not. And that is already the foundation of very good manners. of being a very pleasant person to communicate with if it is not false, acted out modesty, but real modesty that comes from nobility and inner culture. And so look what happens. Parents wanting to raise this beautiful quality that truly would help the child later. Build good relationships, succeed, and be pleasant in society. Instead, impose the traits of neurotic shame, which have nothing at all to do with noble modesty. Noble modesty, when it lives in a person, says, I simply live. I do not need to advertise myself. But shame says, I must be quiet, 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 or I will be rejected. I'd better hide somewhere. You see, those are completely different things. So when you raise children, explain directly what you want from them and understand for yourself what you are trying to develop and instill in them. And if it is modesty, then know how to explain why it matters to respect another person's boundaries, another person's dignity, and your own dignity. Because when a person respects their own dignity, they never need to advertise themselves. They do not need praise, because every person has value in and of themselves. And for your children to feel and understand that, simply give them enough love. On our channel, we share different video series. Psychology by the Fireplace is released every Thursday at 9 p.m. Pacific Time. That you are, my dear ones, and I love you very much too. Until we meet again, bye bye.